The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson.
All right, so welcome to our Chalke History Festival special series here on History with Jackson. We're joined by Alfred Hawkins. How you doing, mate?
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you for having me at the tower. It's absolutely stunning.
Sorry.
Yeah.
While I'm not drinking. That's right.
Yeah, but so what inspired you to get into history and be a historian?
Kind of lots of little things. Well, two big things. I mean, I talk about this a lot, but both my parents were archaeologists, with my mum then becoming later archivist at the local museum, and so I was constantly surrounded by archaeology and history for my entire early life, which I hated. Kind of being dragged every weekend to Iron Age hill forts and different churches and being like, oh yeah, look at this really lovely church. When all my friends were coming back from school holidays, being like, oh yeah, we just went to Spain and da-da-da. And I was like, yeah, I went on like a church trek in Devon. And so I rebelled against it because it was what my parents were into, but it did give me a lot of access into how those kinds of things work. And then when I eventually completely messed up my A-levels, because I did all of the sciences and business, I think, I thought, okay, what am I just good at? And I was always good at history because I was surrounded by it. And so I did a history A-level in 1 year to kind of bolster my overall A-level grades, and then applied for history at Chichester, and it's there. I was obviously always surrounded by archaeology, but it was actually engaging with history and the stories that you can tell through that. And as I was saying to you earlier when we were walking through the tower, it was particularly early modern France, and one of my lecturers was just so passionate about the sex, drugs and rock and roll that is early modern France that I suddenly was just like, oh my God, I absolutely love this. And combining it with what I'd got from my parents in terms of archaeology and built heritage, made me want to actually engage with it. And so being a curator now, I'm in a separate bit of kind of the heritage world. And so I like having my own bit within my family, because my brother's also a built heritage specialist in London. So it's nice that we're all kind of history adjacent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a very long answer for that.
No, it's really nice that it's a family affair, because being able to
I was nice up until Christmas when somebody decides to bring up some random history thing that they really like and everybody else violently disagrees with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when your family likes it, it's all right, but then those moments, they're just painful. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I'm really, in hindsight, massively grateful to both of my parents for giving me that access and sharing, because no one works in heritage for the money, and sharing their passion with me is the single biggest kind of legacy, I would say, for me, actually engaging with history and getting involved.
Oh, that's really nice. But then you said you did science at A-level. How does that interdisciplinary nature work with your work as a historian?
Well, I mean, as you know, history and archaeology is interdisciplinary. So I, at Historical Palaces, have the great joy of working with some amazing conservation scientists, kind of experts in human remains, all the different forms of archaeology, from petrology to dirt, environmental sampling to DNA sequencing to everything. So I still definitely get my fix of science, but I'm definitely not as good at science as I am at history and curating.
Well, you're doing a fantastic job as a... But then, so your talk at Chalke this year is going to be looking at old heritage, new visitors. But I think a lot of time we get caught up in this idea when we look at sites like Tower of London, Tower Bridge, which you can also see. a lot of people think about their emotions today. What were the emotions that people were experiencing when they were looking at these sites, when they were being built, or as they'd stood there for only 100 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and it's a bit of the kind of the study of history that I find quite difficult to engage with, is saying, oh, I really like this person from history, or this person is my favourite, or stuff like that, because most of these people wouldn't have cared about you or I, and they're disconnected from us by such a vast period that it is really, really difficult for us to meaningfully engage with what their emotions may have been. For the tower specifically, it entirely depends on context. If you are King Edward I and you have just spent a huge amount of money expanding the fortress into a concentric castle with new elements of the palatial ward, I'm sure when you approach the tower you would feel quite proud. You would be, look at this magnificent representation of my own strength. If you were a member of the Jewish community in 1290, sitting on the wharf waiting to be expelled, then you would be viewing this place with dread and with horror. If you were a member of the Mint, located in the outer ward from the 13th century right until the 19th century, this is your place of work. And so the history of emotions is an interesting way to try and engage with the past, but I think we do have to be really careful to be mindful of the context of these individual people, and also that they would not approach anything in their lives in the same way that we would. And so layering how you feel onto their lives is not always incredibly useful, but it does obviously allow you to have a kind of a slightly deeper connection. And so it's a balance that I think we all have to strike somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's an important role as a historian, divorcing our feelings from those contemporary feelings, because
and that doesn't mean that you can't feel.
yeah.
And so some of our fellow 30 under 30 winners are doing really good stuff, so being kind of talking about engaging with your own emotions, and when you see the remnants of particular histories, it's okay to feel, it's okay to be sad when you see things, it's okay to feel joy and be overawed and all of those different things. But I just think that when we are trying to study the past, we have to be very, post-structuralists, we have to be very explicit about what our own internal biases are, how we feel about something, and then try and disconnect that from how we may interpret other people in the past as feeling.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the different feelings that people have and the different roles, because I think this place and many other main historical sites that we talk about are big moment in history places. So how do you kind of look to tell the story of everyone, or as many people as you can, because it's not just royalty who've been here?
Yes, no, I mean that's what makes the tower such a wonderful site to study, because it is a palace, it is a prison, it's a mint, it's the home of the Board of Ordnance, it's menagerie, all those different things, and all those different people engaging with it, and particularly who I'm interested in is the craftspeople and kind of surveyors who are actually building these places. We try and tell, well, we have to tell stories that people expect, because the other balance of heritage sites is these places cost millions of pounds a year just to keep still, just to keep standing. Forget about all of the development stuff that you do to improve things, to do new exhibitions, all of that kind of stuff. The bare bones conservation costs millions. It is by far the largest part of HRP's, historical palaces, expenditure. And so to draw people in, we have to connect to the popular narratives that people want to see. And at the Tower, that is Anne Boleyn, the Six Queens, Henry VIII in particular. The way that we try and tell those stories to be more inclusive is by doing the research and making sure that we understand who these people are, where they were, how they engaged with the fortress, what their story is, and then interlacing them with other stories they were telling. And so if you walk around and look at all of our interpretation boards, they're the first layer of the onion. And so if you then go on to our website and read through our blogs, if you engage with TikTok or other social media, all of those things just add another layer where we can tell new and interesting stories. So when you're talking about interpreting a site as massive as the tower, there are ways of doing it without plastering the site in interpretation, which obviously would undermine the aesthetic nature of this place. And so there is a balance. And you have to draw people in, but the key thing is once you've drawn them in, you can then tell them more and more stories and take them on a journey. And so almost all of our exhibitions you can see as a journey of additional understanding, and there's always a way to learn more beyond what you can actually see through our website, through all of our other kind of outreach stuff.
I like the metaphor about the onion, because a lot of our history, the way we both do history, is very onion style. I feel like Shrek and Donkey now. But when you're showing our age now, but when you're researching these stories and you're going deeper and deeper, I think it might be part of the best part of doing the research, and sometimes part of the difficult part, is that not all of these sources are available. So how do you either go and get these stories or fill these gaps in? Because we were talking before we came in about the Wars of the Roses, regime change and documents being destroyed.
Principally by ordering, whenever most of us go to the National Archives, we'll obviously have gone through the catalogue, order random things up. You never know what's going to be in a completely weird place. And also the curatorial department at Historical Palaces is uniquely placed in that we have so many people who are specialists in different places, and that's broadly how the curatorial department is able to look after and interpret all of these places, because someone's a specialist in kind of how we do inclusive history, someone's an architectural historian of the 13th century, someone specialises in the 14th, 15th, so on and so forth. And so there are always other people that you can lean on, and if there's a story that you've kind of found an inkling of, we can talk to each other and see if they'll say, oh, have you checked this place? It gets difficult from an interpretation point of view, and I mean, we'll talk about this as well when we're talking about baptismal records. For most people, all you will ever find is baptism, marriage, death. And so filling in the gaps, you can go through building accounts, various other things, and try and find people's names. It's tricky, and you have to do what you can, and sometimes you will do a lot of research and find almost nothing, and there will be someone who you know might be fantastically interesting, but you can't tell that story at the moment because you don't have the records. And a key part of what we do as in interpreting these sites is we have to be authentic, and we have to actually present things as we know them. And so there will be curators in the future who will continue to do research. They might find something else. It's a balance. There's telling interesting stories, and there are stories where we don't have enough information to make it interesting and to go through all of those nuances. And it's just a balance between them all. If that makes any sense.
No, it makes complete sense. Because I think it's about audience, really, and where audiences are ready for stories and not ready for stories, or
I don't necessarily know if people are all either ready or not ready. I think you can take anyone on a journey of understanding, and you can see that in our interpretation panels. We write in a very specific way so they can be understood by anybody, but it's getting that hook in, and then providing them with more information in different ways so that you can flesh out things. Where it gets difficult, from a research point of view, is having the ability to flesh it out. So if you can't find those documents, then we'll have to sit on the story, because it won't be interesting to people, and people like having a beginning, middle and end. And we do share the research that we do. We are an independent research organisation, and so we work with a lot of external IROs, universities, and so on and so forth, and contribute to other people's research as well.
So how do you, I know you're saying the interpretation boards, but in the last probably about 10 years, there's been a massive change in the way that people want to digest this content. Now, obviously, this place is not going to disappear. I hope not. Yeah, but how has it changed the way that you reach out?
Oh, massively so. And I don't know if I'm necessarily the best person to talk about this because I'm the kind of talking head element of it. But there is a skill, a kind of skill from the historian's point of view, of being able to do that research, to understand something, and then to condense it into 30 seconds so that it can be consumed on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platform that you use. Follow Historical Palaces on all of them. So there has been a massive sea change, but I think that can only really be interpreted as a good thing because the kind of advent of this kind of technology that is so readily available to everyone means that we can have impact as a charity, and we call it reaching further and meaning more. Historical Palaces cares for the Tower of London, the Banqueting House, Hampton Court Palace, Kensington Palace, and Kew Palace, and Hillsborough Castle and Gardens in Northern Ireland. So our site locations, if you exclude Hillsborough Castle in Northern Ireland, are very London focused. And we get a lot of outreach from a predominantly international visitor base at the Tower, but having access to TikTok and Instagram and those kinds of things means that we can engage with somebody in the Shetland Isles or in Egypt or in America and all over the world. And so it just means it does dumb down history a little bit because obviously there is a large difference between a peer-reviewed academic journal and a 30-second video on TikTok. But I think being able to reach those people and being able to kind of engage them in the study of history far outbalances anything else that you can do. And particularly for a charity like us, Super Blue, which was our project in the moat for the Lake Queen's Platinum Jubilee, we had a schools outreach programme which principally focused on kind of like biodiversity and things like that because we changed the moat into a flower garden. We reached almost a school from Land's End right up into the north of Scotland. So we engage with so many people through these different means that it can only be a good thing.
I think it's particularly good that school children are coming as well because we were once that generation who were visiting these sites, and I know you feel important about it as well that we have to make sure the next generation comes in beneath us as well.
Yeah, and it also from a wider point of view, not just speaking as a curator of historic buildings for Historical Palaces, it allows more people to engage with being a historian. So obviously, everybody who wants to be a historian is not going to become a curator. Everyone who wants to be a historian is not going to become a professor at a university. There are not enough jobs, which is keenly felt by everybody. But having Instagram and Facebook and all those kinds of things mean that anybody is able to reach people. And if you have an interest, you can study it, you can share it, and that's a wonderful thing. There does need to be a balance between where the money is, I think, because for me, a key part of the historian's job is contributing to knowledge overall, and that is principally done through academic publishing in journals. And we need to make sure that we don't draw people too far away so that they only focus on the outreach stuff and not contributing to peer-reviewed proper, I did air quotes there, history. So we veered very, very far to one side, and I think we do need to find a better middle ground between them. But overall, being able to engage with all those people, and as you say, kind of passing the buck to the next generation and saying, you don't have to be a posh man who went to Oxford in order to tell histories is hugely important. And I didn't go to Oxford and all those kinds of things, but it lets more people engage with not only being told about history, but doing the telling as well.
Yeah, I think that pendulum you talk about, the swinging from outreach to academic work is quite keenly felt, because there is a greater divergence now than I think there's ever been. Even me and you were accessing those journals most days. Sometimes I'm opening the first page and I'm thinking, what?
There is that, but it's the way being judged by your peers is horrifying. Mm-hmm. But it makes you a better historian, because you get to learn from other people, you get to see how they would approach the study of this subject, and it's a way of interrogating your research and making sure that you are doing things not necessarily in the correct way, but that you have that authenticity and that kind of that you are being factual, which I think is very, very important. So it is dense, it is occasionally profoundly boring, but we can't lose sight of that as the principal way to contribute to historic narratives. And if we're taking a kind of 13-second TikTok against it, yes, it's fantastic when you can engage a couple of million people. It's then gone. It's in the ether. It's not written down. And if it is a piece of original research, that should be documented in a more robust way, and then should be, as I say, interrogated by your peers.
Yeah. Then you talk about authenticity as well. I think that's really important. So when you have a site like the Tower of London trying to maintain, curate displays and exhibitions, how do you maintain the authenticity of the site and the history? Because it's gone through so many different stages, so many editions. It must be a tough line.
I mean, this is the Tower's greatest secret. I mean, this is not the fortress of William the Conqueror, nor is it the fortress of Edward I or Henry VIII. Sites, natural, and I should probably explain that. So I am curator of historic buildings. So my principal focus is on the built fabric and the archaeology. The interpretation that I write is principally focused around interpreting what the buildings are, and the stories that we can tell through the buildings. So craftspeople and people who are paying for things and that kind of stuff. In terms of being kind of having integrity and being authentic, it's very, very difficult because, and particularly with an international visitor base, so it's principally very difficult for some American visitors to grasp the concept of, you're looking at the White Tower, which was built 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years of history is a difficult thing to engage with, and how that building has changed over time is difficult to engage with. And so the way that we interpret it is to be as honest as we can, but also make it engageable and approachable for somebody who's never studied the tower. So the White Tower itself, it looks kind of unchanging and monolithic. It's been through hundreds of changes. I can look out the window and I can see windows that were installed by Christopher Wren alongside windows that were installed in the 17th century, alongside windows that were installed in the 19th century by Anthony Salvin. We don't necessarily have an interpretation board that says, oh, this stone comes from this date. Instead, we talk more broadly about the wider picture, and as I say, it's the layers on an onion. You can then engage with our website, where we talk about specific features, so the Chapel of St. John, or Christopher Wren's observations of the White Tower, those kinds of things. It's always thinking about, you don't want to just, as you say, empty a relatively dry academic journal over every visitor's head, but you want to give them enough that they understand what they're looking at. And the White Tower, it's an 11th century building. We call it an 11th century building. We don't necessarily say all of these bits of different things, but to enable access to that more detailed information is an integral part of it, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it makes complete sense, because I think when you're talking about American visitors, I think the British sense of history is very, very different.
Yes, and every country approaches history in a slightly different way, and so we have to be kind of cognizant of the fact that people will be approaching this place with no knowledge whatsoever. And if you want to come out, have a lovely day, and say, I saw a tower that was built by William the Conqueror, grand. If you say, oh, those windows don't look like they quite make sense on an 11th century building, how do I engage more with that? How have these floors changed over time? What's this scarring at the top of the White Tower, which is evidence of where the Norman roofline originally was? We facilitate that, so it's allowing people to engage with history as far as they want to.
Yeah, no, I like that, the engaging as far as you want to, because not a lot of people want to go too deep as we would.
No.
But it's that...
And people are interested in different things. I mean, even between us, we are interested in wildly different periods of history. And so I'm sure we would read each other's journals and be profoundly bored. But that's fantastic, because it means that we get to talk to each other about weird and wonderful things that I've never heard of or you've never heard of. So it's all this kind of coalescence of different people studying different things and trying to share it with people who want to engage with it to different levels in different ways. That's one of the things that I like about history and about being a curator is I get to do academic history, and that is a privilege because I am in a salaried position and I have time to do research and time to write. But I also am not kind of locked away in the archive forever. I do get to kind of go out and give talks to members or to write interpretation boards and this and that and the other. So that's why being a curator for me is the pinnacle of historian.
It seems like there's a very nice, very, very nice balance, but how does that contrast with your role as a cathedral archaeologist as well?
Cathedral archaeologists are strange beasts. I mean, there's a bit of a fallacy in what being a cathedral archaeologist is. It kind of labours under the idea that any one person can do all of archaeology. The practice of archaeology is probably one of the most multidisciplinary parts of the study of history. You will have specialists in Roman pottery, in kind of Neolithic flints or brass or bronze swords, and anything and everything. People who specialise very heavily in metal craft in this 10-year period. And so you get to work with loads of different people, and it needs all of those different people because I'm principally a buildings archaeologist. So you can show me a wall and I can tell you what the phasing of that wall is broadly, and get more detailed if I'm actually able to study it. But if we're doing below ground excavation, I will need to engage with other specialists who are better than me at other elements of archaeology. And so there is the cathedral archaeologist. The background is that as part of the church's measure and various other laws that every cathedral with with areas of archaeological importance needs to have an archaeologist as an advisor. But there will be things that I will be asked in that role that I will have to then engage with other people. So it's more broad than just saying I know everything about cathedrals. But in terms of how that works in relation to being a curator, it's much more light touch. So at Portsmouth Cathedral, as is with almost all of the cathedrals in the country, it's a place of worship. That is its primary function. They are obviously places of community. They are also heritage sites. They are effectively museums. All of those kind of wrapped up into one. And so my role is to provide specific advice on history and archaeology about both the standing building and below ground archaeology when they want to change their lights, or if they want to build a visitor centre or install kind of air source heat pumps and those kind of things. And so it is much more light touch, and it's much more kind of hit and miss. because almost all cathedrals are running a deficit, and so none of them are able to do the kind of conservation work that they need to effectively, apart from the kind of really big ones. But the thing I like about that, and particularly the thing I like about Portsmouth, is they're free, or most cathedrals, at least, are free. And so you can engage with people who can't necessarily afford to come to the tower. And because they are places of community, and you get a lot of school visits and things like that. So when I went for my interview at Portsmouth Cathedral, I applied for it because I'd always wanted to be a cathedral archaeologist, because although I spent most of my life studying castles, churches and cathedrals are the built heritage that I absolutely love, and that's despite not being religious. Just as representations of faith and craftspeople's skill, they cannot be beaten. But Portsmouth Cathedral is a jumped-up parish church, but it is a very interesting one, with a 12th century eastern end and 17th century middle, and then a modern frontage. But when I went, and so I applied, I was thinking, it's not quite as grand as Durham or Wells or Chichester or various other ones. But when I walked through the doors, they were having the Festival of Storytelling, and there were a load of sheets on the floor in the nave, and there were kids running around, reading, playing with toys, doing this, that, the other, and particularly in areas where libraries have been shut down, where kind of youth clubs have been shut down, all of those kinds of things. Cathedrals and places of worship offer a place for communities to be safe, to engage with new things, and to really be a centre for people coming together. And so if I can occasionally throw a bit of archaeology or history into that general outreach, then I'm ecstatic. I come from Hastings, which when I was growing up there isn't the most well-off town, and I truly believe that history is for everyone. And so if I can engage in another seaside town which has some very deprived areas and help them to engage with history, then fabulous. And the kind of the conservation side of it is principally what I do here. I will be given a proposal. We want to put X number of holes through X wall because we need new lighting so that we can have silent disco. And then I will say, okay, well, as long as we do it through this bit because it's less significant and we record it in this way, It's exactly the kind of conservation work that I do here with the maintenance team. So it gives me a different means of reaching people that I don't have at a paid visitor attraction, as a curator of a paid visitor attraction, which I just really enjoy. And I feel like I just keep waffling on in these answers and not really answering the question.
But you are answering the question, because there's such a huge amount of passion in the way you're speaking about it, but also in the way that you're trying to engage new visitors in the history of these sites, but also in the different histories. I think you keep talking about how there's not just one way to experience things, there's not just one history about something. No. There's so many different ones you can learn about and engage with, or not engage with as well.
Yeah, I think that's a crucial part of what, if we're talking about how we are as historians, talking about emotions earlier, I think we also have to be very aware that some people will not care, and that's absolutely fine. And the different means of kind of engaging with people, one of the best ways of talking about it would probably be through the Yeoman Warder tours at the Tower, which are fantastic. You should all visit the Tower of London and go on a Yeoman Warder tour. They are stories. They're not entirely historically accurate, but there have been yeomen here, the Yeoman Warders, since 1485, and they've been giving tours since 1485, and there is a huge bit of cultural heritage that is a bombastic soldier telling you these kind of weird and wonderful stories. Whereas if I gave that tour, people would probably be asleep after about 10 minutes, because I'd start on the causeway, and then I'd go off on a complete tangent about beach posts that Edward I uses to reclaim the area from the Thames, and how it's so fantastic that all of these places are still standing and how we look after them and people just wander off. But there needs to be both, because there will be people who want to engage with stuff that I do, and there'll be people who want to engage with stuff that the yeomen do, and it's working together so that I give them new stories that they're able to take and make their own and engage with people. And I'm able to learn from them in not taking myself quite so seriously. And it's okay to tell a story. And it's one of the things that we always say at Historical Palaces: we never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And we have, it's a silly thing to say, but it's true, because history is not just archives and artifacts and objects. It is the stories that we tell one another and how we engage with different elements of who we think we are. That's also very important. And so playing a small role in helping to do all of these kinds of things is what gets me going.
I think that's a really nice driver for you, and I think that's actually the perfect place to ask you, final fun questions we do for every guest on the podcast. You've spoken about an awful lot of sites. You started going to an awful lot of sites on your Instagram as well. What is your? I know you said you don't like people saying favourite person for history. Favourite. What do you think is the most underrated historical site that you've visited?
Underrated historical site. Maybe not underrated, but less well known, because I think everybody rates historical sites in different ways. I fell in love with history at Chichester, and so the churches around there are kind of my safe space. Boxgrove Priory is just the most obscenely beautiful church near Chichester. But my absolute favourite place that not very many people know about is the Hospital of St Cross in Winchester. And so it's kind of amazing church surrounded by the kind of houses for the brothers who live there, and they still do alms and all those kinds of things. But the area around it is pretty much its medieval landscape, and so it's one of those, and it's used a lot in Wolf Hall. It's one of the very few places where you can visit and you can truly feel as though you are in that period and you can properly get into it. And so, Hospital of St Cross in Winchester would probably be my top pick, just because it does something entirely different to the tower. We were walking in, you have to walk past the Shard and the walkie-talkie building. It's very difficult to get a sense of what this fortress actually means. But there you can get a completely different sense.
I think that's a really, really nice answer, and I like how you combined different parts of your personal life into it as well. I mean, I love Chichester, so I think that's a really nice answer.
Fabulous.
And then obviously, if people want to go and interact with you, your work, and then Tower of London, where can they go?
So follow Historical Palaces on all of our different social media platforms, and you'll get to see me and all of my colleagues talk about weird and wonderful history. Portsmouth Cathedral also have various social media outlets. Me personally, usually if you put ARJ Hawkins in, you will either find my personal account or my history account. The trick is my history account will say history at the end of it. And so follow that one, and not my personal one.
Yeah, well, I'll make sure they're all in the description below, and then you're going to be speaking at Chalke as well this year,
absolutely.
which will be interesting.
Can't wait to be at Chalke, and particularly to talk with the other guys about how we are engaging with different audiences, because we all do pretty dramatically different things. But I think it'll be a really good panel.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Well, thank you very much.
Fabulous. Thank you.
The Chalke History Festival special series on history with Jackson.